Rain fell on Vatican City, not as a gentle blessing, but as a cold, weeping shroud. It slicked the ancient cobblestones and dripped from the grimacing gargoyles that watched over the empty piazza. Within the hallowed walls of the apostolic palace, the silence was not one of peace, but of a breath held too long. It was a silence that had been purchased with blood. The body of a Swiss guard lay splayed across the marble floor of a secluded corridor, his pristine uniform now a canvas of horrific ruin. The crimson of his tunic was nothing compared to the vivid arterial scarlet that bloomed around him, seeping into the grout between the stones. His helmet had rolled away, revealing a face frozen in a final, silent scream, eyes wide with an impossible terror. But it was the wall that held the true message of the atrocity. Above the corpse, written in a fluid, glistening script that was not paint, a message was scrawled, Slinctus eis et non eris. You are holy and are no more. The air itself was thick and greasy, tasting of rust and something older, a foulness that no incense could hope to purify. It was into this sacrilege that he was summoned. He moved without sound, a tall, broad-shouldered figure enveloped in a long, dark coat that seemed to drink the dim light of the oil sconces. His name was Cassio, a whisper in certain cursed circles, a legend in others. He was the Pontificus Venedor, the Pope's own hunter, a being of two bloods, one human, one divine. His face, all sharp angles and grim purpose, was partially shadowed by his hood, but his eyes glowed with a faint internal, golden light, the embers of his celestial heritage. He did not look at the butchered guard for long. The mortal tragedy was a symptom, not the cause. His gaze was fixed on the writing. He approached, his boot soles making no mark in the carnage. He knelt, ignoring the pool of blood that lapped at his knees, and reached out. His fingers, clad in worn leather, did not touch the wall. Instead, they hovered an inch from the message, and the air crackled. The viscous blood sizzled and blackened at his proximity, the unholy energy within it recoiling from his innate sanctity. A low guttural sound echoed down the corridor, a sound that could not have been made by any human throat. It was a sound of mockery, of challenge, a promise of further defilement. It came from everywhere and nowhere, swirling in the tainted air. Seal rose, his hand moving to the hilt of the sword sheathed on his back. It was not a simple blade of steel. Forged in a divine fire, its crossguard was shaped like unfurling wings. And along its length, faint ethereal script shimmered, reacting to the profound evil that saturated the room. Luxte, the light of God, hummed with a low, eager frequency. The demon was not here. Not anymore. This was its announcement. A declaration of war from within the very heart of Christendom. It was powerful, arrogant, and it had stained the sacred stones with a violence that was both physical and spiritual. Cassiel's glowing eyes scanned the darkness ahead, the labyrinthine passages of the ancient palace suddenly feeling like the gullet of some colossal beast. The hunt had begun not in some desolate ruin, but here, in the most fortified sanctuary of faith on earth. And the prey was not hiding. It was waiting. He took a first step forward, following the fading, foul tremor in the air. A solitary figure of wrath and grace stepping from the circle of blood into the deeper shadows, ready to answer the challenge with fury. Cassiel moved through the bowels of the apostolic palace, a shadow against deeper shadows. The reek of the demoness passage was a trail only he could sense, psychic spur of brimstone and corrupted prayer that hung in the air like a miasma. It led him downward, away from the gilded halls, and into the cold, stone-lined undercroft, a place of forgotten relics and older foundations. Here the air was heavy with the weight of centuries, and the demon's presence was a fresh, open wound upon it. The trail ended at a heavy, iron-bound door, slightly ajar. From within, a faint, sickly green luminescence pulsed, and a wet, tearing sound echoed into the corridor. He pushed the door open silently. The room was a storage chamber for damaged sacred artifacts, broken statues of saints, torn vestments, splintered pews waiting for repair. Now, it was a charnel house. Another guard was pinned to the far wall, not by a weapon, but by a jagged spear of wood that had once been part of a crucifix. It impaled him through the chest, holding him aloft like a grotesque butterfly specimen. His blood painted a dark, dripping cascade down the cold stone. In the center of the room, hunched over its grisly work, was the thing itself. It was a nightmare of twisted theology. It had the general shape of a man, but its limbs were elongated, ending in talons of bone that scraped against the floor. Its skin was the color of a week-old bruise, and from its back protruded not wings, but two mutilated skeletal appendages, a profane mockery of angelic pinions. Stripped of feathers and glistening with a foul ichor, it was feeding on the spiritual residue of the desecrated objects, its form flickering with stolen sanctity. It sensed him. Its head rotated a full 180 degrees with a sound of cracking vertebrae. Its face was a hollow mask, featureless, save for a wide, gaping maw, lined with needle-like teeth, from which a black, forked tongue lolled. Casil felt the familiar cold fury rise within him, a tide that was both human revulsion and divine mandate. This abomination was not just a demon. It was a perversion of his own nature, a thing that had sought to steal the form of the divine, to amplify its own profanity. The demon launched itself without a sound, a blur of malformed bone and lethal intent. Casil was faster. Luxday cleared its sheath with a sound like a ringing bell, the blade blazing with a pure white gold light that seared the eyes. He met the charge not with a block, but with a devastating horizontal cut. The holy steel sheared through one of the demon's clawed arms. Black, viscous blood, thick as tar and burning with acid heat, sprayed across the floor, sizzling where it landed. The demon shrieked, a sound of pure, undiluted hatred that shook dust from the ceiling. It retreated, clutching its stump. Casil advanced, his every step deliberate. The light from his sword pushed back the green gloom, illuminating the full horror of the room. The thing on the wall, the blood, the defiled artifacts. The demon's form began to shift and bubble, its stolen energy coalescing. The skeletal protrusions on its back twitched violently, and from the bleeding stump of its arm, a new weapon of hardened bone and darkness began to extrude, shaping itself into a cruel, serrated blade. Casil did not wait for it to finish. He remembered the words of his mentor, a man whose faith had been as solid as these very stones. They are rage and hunger. We are purpose and will. With a roar that was both human and something more, he closed the distance. This was no longer a hunt. It was an execution. The legacy of his blood, both the feather and the fury, demanded it. The blade of light met the blade of bone in a shower of sparks and a scream that was torn from the depths of hell itself. The serrated blade of bone shattered against Luxday's immutable edge. The demon's shriek hit a fever pitch, a physical force that cracked the stones at its feet. Casil did not flinch. His counterstroke was a blur of celestial fire, shearing through the demon's other arm at the shoulder. More of the corrosive black blood geysered, splattering across Casil's coat, which smoked but did not burn. The holy wards stitched into the fabric held. The thing that mocked an angel stumbled back, its form flickering, its stolen power unstable. It was not a fight anymore. It was a dissection. Casil advanced, his glowing eyes devoid of mercy, only a cold, relentless purpose. The demon scrambled backward, its talons scratching frantically at the floor. It was not trying to attack, it was trying to escape. With a final, desperate motion, it slammed its mutilated body against the far wall of the chamber, not a wall of stone. One of old rotten wood paneling that concealed a forgotten passage. The wood splintered inward and the creature vanished into the absolute blackness beyond. Casil followed without hesitation, plunging into the narrow, suffocating darkness. The air changed instantly. It was cold, damp, and carried the faint, sweet smell of decayed parchment and dust. This was not part of the official Vatican archives. This was something older, a secret artery within the body of the Holy See. His celestial sight adjusted, painting the world in shades of silver and gloom. He was in a tight corridor, its walls lined not with brick, but with shelves. On those shelves were books. Thousands of them. Tomes bound in what looked like pale leather, scrolls of vellum, tablets of dark stone etched with languages dead before Rome was founded. This was a reliquary of heresy, a secret library of the forbidden and the blasphemous, collected over millennia to be hidden away from the world. The demon's black blood dotted the floor, leading him deeper into the maze of shelves. And then the whispers began. They were not sounds, but sensations. psychic impressions left upon the air by the countless unholy words contained in the texts. They brushed against his mind like cobwebs, maddening promises. Ancient curses, revelations that could unmake a mortal's sanity. They were the echoes of every silent prayer ever offered to a dark god. Every whispered incantation that begged for power from the abyss. The demon was drawing strength from them, its presence ahead growing stronger, fed by this ocean of corruption. Casil felt a pressure build behind his eyes, a screaming headache that was both physical and spiritual. His human half recoiled at the psychic assault, a nauseating vertigo threatening to overwhelm him. He pressed on, his grip on Luck's day tightening. The swords light a small, defiant sun in the overwhelming dark. The whispers grew more intense, forming words in dead tongues, promising power, demanding submission. He saw fleeting visions in the periphery of his sight. Twisted forms, burning cities, altars dripping with blood. Ahead, the corridor opened into a small circular chamber. The demon was there on its knees, not in supplication, but in consumption. It had torn open an ancient iron chest, and from it was pulling a scroll that shimmered with a vile internal energy. It was feeding, gorging itself on the concentrated evil of a forgotten gospel. It turned its featureless face toward him, and its maw stretched into a wide, horrifying grin. It was no longer retreating, it was preparing. Empowered by the echoes of a billion silent, damned prayers, it began to change, its body swelling with stolen, blasphemous power. The real battle, Casil knew, was only just beginning. The demon's form swelled, distended by the vile scripture it had consumed. The whispers of the hidden library coalesced around it, a vortex of silent screams and broken oaths. Its mutilated wings shuddered, and new, jagged bones erupted from its back, knitting together into a grotesque, thorny crown. It was no longer a mockery of an angel, but a pope of its own profane religion. Casil did not give it time to complete its transformation. With a roar that cut through the psychic cacophony, he charged Luxday, carving a blazing arc through the darkness. The demon parried with a forearm now sheathed in ossified plate, and the impact was thunderous, shaking the ancient shelves and sending blasphemous texts tumbling to the floor in a cloud of dust and malevolent energy. The thing was stronger, faster, its movements fueled by 1,000 heresies. It drove forward, a battering ram of hatred, and Casil was forced back, his boots sliding on the scattered pages of forgotten sins. Talons raked across his chest, tearing through his coat and drawing lines of fire across his skin. His blood, a shimmering silver gold, welled in the wounds, sizzling where it met the demon's corrosive black essence. The demon recoiled at the touch of his divine blood, hissing in pain and surprise. It was the opening Casil needed. He lunged, not for a killing blow, but to drive the creature back, away from the source of its power. He herded it, a furious, blazing shepherd, guiding a beast of hell. Through a crumbling archway the demon itself had shattered in its flight. They burst not into another forgotten tunnel, but into a place of profound, familiar sanctity. A sacristy. The air, once redolent with the scent of beeswax and blessed chrism, was now choked with the same foulness that clung to the demon. This was where the priests prepared for Mass, where holy vestments were kept, or had been kept. The room was a vision of utter desecration. White albas and rich chasubles were torn from their presses and strewn about, trampled and smeared with excrement in that same black, viscous blood. A rack of sacred vessels had been toppled, chalices dented, patens bent. The focus of the horror was the central table. Upon it, the mangled remains of a sacristan lay amidst the ruin, his throat slit so deeply he was nearly decapitated. His blood had been used to defile everything, painting obscene sigils on the white marble walls. The demon seemed to revel in it, its power surging anew in this defiled sanctuary. It threw its head back, and a soundless laugh shook the room, a psychic assault of pure mockery. But Casil's fury had found a new, colder temperature. This was not just an attack. It was a statement. It was a deliberate soiling of the sacred, a violation of the very rituals that sustained the light against the darkness. His grip on Luxday tightened until the leather of his gloves creaked. The sword's light, which had been a steady glow, now flared into an incandescent star, burning away the psychic filth in the air. The demon's laughter died as it turned to face this renewed wrath. Casil stood between it and the defiled altar, his bloody chest rising and falling, his eyes twin suns of judgment. The hunt was over. This was now a crusade, a sacristy, a place of peaceful preparation. It had become a cathedral of carnage, and its only sermon would be written in steel and hellfire. The demon lunged, a black comet of hatred aimed at Cassiel's heart. But the hunter was no longer just a pursuer. He was an immovable object, a pillar of divine wrath planted in defiled ground. He sidestepped the charge, and Lux Day moved with him. A searing arc of light that sheared through the demon's newly formed crown of bone. The thing screamed, a raw, mindless sound of agony, stumbling past him to crash into a cabinet of sacred oils. Glass shattered, and the air filled with the cloying stench of myrrh and frankincense mixed with rot. Casil pressed his advantage, his boot crushing a trampled stole as he advanced. The demon, wounded and disoriented, did not turn to fight. Instead, it scrambled toward a small, ornate door set into the sacristy wall, a private entrance used by high-ranking clergy. With a burst of its remaining strength, it splintered the lock and vanished into the space beyond. Casil followed without a moment's hesitation, bursting into a private study. The air was still and thick with the scent of old paper, fine leather, and a faint, expensive cologne. This was no communal space. Rich mahogany bookshelves lined the walls, holding leather-bound theological texts and histories. A large desk dominated the room, its surface impeccably organized. This was a sanctuary of a different kind, a place of power and contemplation. And it was empty, save for the trail of black blood leading toward the desk. The demon was gone, but the foulness of its presence remained, a fresh, hot stain in the room's tranquil atmosphere. Cassiel's glowing eyes scanned the room, his senses stretching out, searching for the ripple of unnatural concealment. The trail did not lead out the main door. It led to the desk and simply stopped. He approached. Lux Day held low, its light glinting off the polished wood. There was no hidden panel he could see, no obvious trigger. Then his gaze fell upon the desk itself. Among the neatly arranged pens and blotter lay a single object that was utterly out of place. It was a small, grotesque figurine, carved from a dark, oily stone. It depicted a writhing, multi-limbed thing, a tiny blasphemy resting beside a silver crucifix. The contradiction was a scream in the silence. Casil reached for it, not with his hand, but with the tip of his sword. The moment the holy light touched the idol, the air behind the desk shimmered. An illusion fell away, revealing a narrow, hidden doorway that had been seamlessly blended into the bookshelf. From within the darkness beyond that door, a new scent washed out, overriding the demon's spore. It was the metallic temps of fresh blood, human blood. Casil stepped through the doorway into a small, windowless chamber. The scene within was not one of battle but of revelation. A man in the rich, crimson cassock of a cardinal was on his knees, his back to the door. Shoulders shook with silent sobs. Before him, on the floor, a complex circle was drawn in blood, not the black ichor of the demon, but deep human crimson. Within the circle lay the remains of a sacrifice, a small white dove, its neck cruelly snapped. The cardinal turned, his face a mask of tear-streaked anguish and terror. He was not attacked. He was not possessed. He was guilty. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he whispered, his voice cracking. It was just a little knowledge, a glimpse. I just wanted to know. The truth crashed down upon Casil. The demon hadn't broken into the Vatican. It had been let in, invited. This man, this prince of the church, in his arrogance and thirst for forbidden lore, had performed a ritual. He had opened a door, and something infinitely more terrible than he had ever imagined had walked through it. The blood on the walls, the dead guards, it was all a consequence of one man's damned secret. The demon wasn't just an invader, it was a guest. It was still loose, because its summoner still lived. The cardinal's confession hung in the air, a palpable stench of guilt and despair. Casil looked from the weeping prince of the church to the bloody altar and the dead dove. The demon's trail had not vanished. It had been masked, hidden by the greater sin of its summoner. But now, with the cardinal's will broken and his secret laid bare, the infernal tether snapped back into focus in Cassiel's mind. It was close, very close. He turned from the chamber, leaving the cardinal to his tears and his certain damnation. The man was no longer a priority. Justice for him would be meted out by a higher authority, one far less merciful than Cassiel. The immediate threat was the thing that had been unleashed. The trail led not deeper into the private apartments, but back out into the main corridors of the basilica. The demon was no longer hiding in secret rooms. It was moving into the heart of the public sanctum, a wolf entering the fold. Cassiel followed, a silent, bloodied specter in its wake. The golden light of his eyes was a cold, focused beam cutting through the dim, pre-dawn stillness of the vast nave. The immense space was empty, the towering pillars and gilded ceilings echoing with a hollow silence. The air, usually heavy with the residue of devotion and whispered prayer, was now tainted. The trail led him away from the main altar, toward the side aisles, where rows of dark wooden confessionals stood like silent sentinels. And there it stopped. One confessional, the last in a row, tucked into a shadowy corner. Its door was slightly ajar. From within, a low, rhythmic sound could be heard. A wet chewing noise, and a soft, pathetic weeping. Cassiel approached, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by the immense space. The smell was unmistakable, copper, bile, and that underlying foulness of the abyss. He could feel the demon's presence coiled inside that small, confined space, a snake in a box. It was not hiding, it was waiting, feasting. With the tip of Luck's day, he pushed the door open. The scene within was a masterpiece of profanity. Crammed into the priest's side of the booth was the demon, its form contorted to fit the small space. Its featureless face was buried in the neck of a young priest who was pinned against the wall. His eyes wide with shock and agony, tears carving clean paths through the blood spatter on his cheeks. The demon was feeding not on flesh, but on something purer. The man's faith, his hope, his very soul, draining it in gulps of psychic energy that made the air vibrate. The priest's hand twitched, his fingers brushing the fine mesh screen that separated him from the penitent's side, the very symbol of absolution and grace. Now, a cage for his damnation. The demon slowly pulled its maw from the priest's neck. It did not snarl or shriek. It turned its head and seemed to look at Cassiel through the screen, its blank face a void of infinite malice. In a voice that was a grotesque parody of the cardinal's own cultured tones, layered with the sizzle of static and the echoes of the hellish library, it whispered through the grate, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." It was a mockery of the sacrament, a final twisted joke played out in the very place meant for reconciliation. Then, with a violent convulsion, it ripped itself free from the confessional, exploding outward in a shower of splintered wood and gore. The young priest's body slid down the wall, leaving a slick red smear, his empty eyes staring at the ceiling far above. The demon, now standing fully in the aisle of the greatest church in Christendom, spread its jagged bone wings, and this time, the scream was a physical thing, shattering the glass of nearby votive candles and shaking the foundations. The hunt was over. The thing was done playing. It had come to its cathedral, and it was ready to preach. The demon's scream was not just sound, it was a wave of pure negation, a force that sought to extinguish the very concept of light. Stained glass windows high above rattled in their leaden frames. The countless flames of the votive candles throughout the basilica guttered and died as one, plunging the vast nave into a deep gloom, broken only by the emergency lights casting long skeletal shadows. In that darkness, two suns ignited. Cassiel's eyes blazed, their golden light reflecting off the polished marble floors, now slick with the blood of the young priest. The demon, empowered by its sacrilegious feast, stood to its full height, its thorny crown of bone regenerating, its form swelling with stolen faith and perverted life. It was no longer a skulking predator. It was a champion of the abyss, standing in defiance in the heart of its enemy's strongest citadel. Cassiel felt the cold knot of fury in his chest unravel into a supernova. This was no longer about duty or the hunt. This was personal. Defilement of the sacristy, the murder of the guards, they were atrocities. But this consumption of a soul in a place of mercy, it was an offense that struck at the core of both halves of his being. His human heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum of terror and rage. It screamed at him to flee, to recoil from the sheer, overwhelming evil that now filled the sacred space. The fear was an acid in his veins, a reminder of his mortal frailty. But beneath it, rising like a tide of molten gold, was the angel's wrath. It was a cold, vast, and utterly relentless thing. It did not know fear. It knew only purpose, knew only judgment. It was the divine fury that had cast the first rebels into the pit, and it would not be challenged in this, its own house. The two forces, human, fear and angelic wrath, warred within him for a single, eternal second. And then they fused. The fear did not vanish. It became the fuel, sharpened his senses, heightened his reflexes, poured adrenaline into the vessel that contained an incandescent divine will. The wrath did not erase his humanity. It gave it a weapon beyond comprehension. With a cry that was part battle roar, part psalm of vengeance, Cassiel moved. He was a blur of contained light and darkness. The demon lunged to meet him, talons extended to tear him apart. Cassiel did not dodge. He dropped, sliding under the swipe on his knees, his coat tearing on the bloody floor. As he passed beneath the creature, Luxday flashed upward, opening a deep, sizzling trench across the demon's abdomen. Black ichor, hot as forge fire, poured out, splashing across Cassiel's back and shoulders. He roared through, gritted teeth at the pain, but did not slow, was on his feet in an instant, spinning to face the creature as it stumbled, clutching its guts. The demon shrieked, a sound of rage and now, for the first time, of pain. It swiped at him again, wildly. Cassiel parried the holy sword, meeting Bontalon's with a shower of white sparks. The impact numbed his arm, but he pushed forward, driving the demon back step by step toward the main altar. He was a storm of controlled violence. Every movement was efficient, brutal, and precise. He was no longer just fighting the demon, he was dismantling it. A cut severed a tendon in its leg, causing it to buckle. A reverse stroke sheared through the bony plates on its shoulder. The human fear was there, a constant whisper in the back of his mind, showing him every possible death, every misstep. The angel's wrath ignored it, using the information only to find the next opening, the next strike. He fought not with blind rage, but with a terrifying, calculated fury. He was the angel's wrath, and he was the human's fear. And in that moment, he was the most dangerous thing walking the earth. The demon, for all its stolen power, was just a beast. It was facing a reckoning. Cassiel drove the demon back, a relentless tide of divine steel and fury. Each parry from the creature's bone blades sent shards of darkness skittering across the floor. Each strike from Luxday carved away another piece of its stolen form, each wound weeping that corrosive black blood. They were a maelstrom of light and shadow, spinning through the nave, crashing against pews, leaving smears of gore and ichor in their wake. The demon was weakening, its movements becoming more frantic, less precise. The power it had consumed from the priest was finite, and Cassiel was burning through it with merciless efficiency. With a guttural roar, Cassiel fainted high and swept low, the holy blade severing the demon's leg at the knee. The creature crashed to the marble with a sound like breaking masonry, its shriek one of pure, undiluted agony. It scrabbled backward, dragging its mutilated form, pushing itself with its one good leg and its talons. It was not trying to reach an exit, it was dragging itself toward the main altar, a final, desperate act of defiance. Cassiel advanced, his breath coming in ragged clouds in the chilled air, his own blood mixing with the demon's on the floor. The demon reached the base of the altar, its talons scratching at the golden antependium. It twisted its body, its featureless face seeming to stare up at the towering baldachin. Then, it did something unexpected. It began to convulse, its form shuddering violently. A low, resonant hum started deep within its chest, growing in intensity. Cassiel hesitated, his senses screaming a warning. This was not a death throe, it was a gathering, concentration. The demon's chest cavity began to split open, not from a wound, but from within. A terrible, sickly green light poured from the fissure, a light that held no warmth, only a soul-chilling cold. It was the concentrated essence of the young priest's stolen faith. The last dregs of his soul, corrupted and perverted into a weapon. The demon was going to unleash it a final, blasphemous blast that would not just kill, but would eternally curse this sacred ground, turning the altar into a beacon of despair. Casil raised Luxday, knowing a physical strike would be too late. The energy was already released, an expanding sphere of annihilating green fire. But then, a flicker. A faint, silvery light, like a dying ember, sparked within the heart of the green inferno. The priest's face, for a fleeting second, seemed to superimpose itself over the demon's gaping maw. His expression, not of pain, but of peace. A final, defiant faith. It was the last echo of his soul, fighting back. The green blast faltered, its cohesion broken for a single, crucial moment. It was all the opening Casil needed. Didn't try to block it, drove Luxday point first into the floor at his feet. The holy sword flared brighter than ever before, its light not a weapon, but a shield. A dome of pure golden radiance erupted around him, a bastion against the darkness. The corrupted soul fire hit the divine barrier. The sound was beyond deafening, a silent psychic concussion that shook the very foundations of the basilica. The golden light and the green hellfire consumed each other, boiling away in a storm of opposing energies. Pews were splintered to dust. Marble tiles were scorched and cracked. When the light faded, the air itself was clean. Cursed energy was gone, purified in the cataclysm. The demon lay broken and still at the foot of the altar, its chest cavity a hollow, smoking ruin. The last of the stolen light, the priest's true, uncorrupted soul drifted upward like a wisp of silver smoke before dissolving into the air, finally free. Casil stood panting, the light of his sword dimming to a soft glow. He had won. But the victory tasted of ash and sacrifice. He had not saved the priest. He had only avenged him. The cost of the light was measured in the blood of the innocent, and it was a price that would forever haunt the shadows of his soul. The altar was safe, but it stood illuminated by the light of a soul that had died to keep it holy. Silence descended upon the nave, heavier and more profound than before. The air scoured clean by the clash of energies, now held only the smell of ozone, scorched stone, and the coppery temps of blood. The demon's broken form lay motionless at the base of the altar, a heap of smoldering, unnatural flesh. Casil stood over it. Luxday held loosely in his grip, its light a steady, mournful glow. The human part of him ached, every muscle screaming, every wound burning. The angelic part was cold, satisfied with the execution of justice, yet grimly aware this was not over. A true demon, especially one of such power and arrogance, did not simply die. Its physical form could be broken, its essence scattered, but its core, the vile spark of its existence, needed to be bound, contained, and expelled. To leave it here was to allow a cancer to regrow in the heart of the Vatican. As he watched, a faint, dark vapor began to seep from the demon's remains. It was not smoke, but something more substantive, a coalescing mist of pure malice. It ignored the laws of physics, flowing against the floor like a black tide, not spreading out, but pulling inward, coalescing into a single, thick stream. It slithered away from the altar, moving with purpose, seeking a crack, a drain, a forgotten passage back into the earth. It was trying to escape, to find a deep, dark place to hide and fester. Casil followed, his stride long and determined. The mist flowed across the ravaged nave, past the splintered pews, and slipped into a small, iron-grated ventilation shaft near the floor of a side cupola, forgotten access point to the world beneath the basilica. The necropolis, the city of the dead. With a grunt of effort, Casil pried the grate open, the metal shrieking in protest. A cold, dank breath of air, smelling of soil, old bone, and centuries of silence, wafted up from the darkness. Without hesitation, he dropped into the shaft, landing softly in a narrow, low-ceilinged passage. He was in the labyrinth. The world above, with its marble and gold, was forgotten. Here it was all rough-hewn stone, packed earth, and the oppressive weight of history. The passages were a tangled web, lined with niches local, where the bones of the early faithful rested in endless slumber. The black mist flowed ahead of him, a serpent of shadow guiding him deeper into the maze, and the maze began to change. The demon's essence was not just fleeing, was polluting its escape route. As the mist passed over the ancient brickwork and skeletal remains, the stone itself seemed to sweat a black, tarry substance. Bones within the niches began to rattle, not from any physical force, but from the spiritual poison seeping into them. They shifted, rearranged themselves by unseen hands, extending from their rests like pale, groping fingers. Casil pressed on, Lux Dei his only light, its glow pushing back a darkness that felt increasingly alive and hostile. The passages seemed to tighten, the walls closing in. The rattling grew louder, a chaotic percussion from 1,000 tombs. Ahead, in a junction where several corridors met, the demon's mist swirled, pooling on the floor before beginning to rise, taking a forma, shifting, skeletal mockery of the thing he had just slain, woven from the bones it had defiled. Dead. It was not the demon returned. It was a puppet. A final guardian made from the stolen sanctity of the dead. A wall of animated bone. And hatred meant to delay him, to give the true core of the demon time to flee into the deepest, most forgotten crypt. The bone puppet lunged, a screeching monstrosity of sharpened ribs and claw-like phalanges. Casil met its charge, his sword shearing through limbs and skulls. But for every bone he shattered, 2 more from the walls pulled free to join the fray. He was not fighting a creature. He was fighting the labyrinth itself. He was hacking his way through a nightmare of his own faith. Every step a desecration he was forced to commit to prevent a greater one. The core of the demon was getting away, and he was trapped in a labyrinth of bones, each one a silent accusation. The labyrinth fought him with the bones of the faithful. Every shattered ribcage, every skull cleaved in two by Lux Dei's blazing edge, was a small agony. Cassio was a force of nature, a whirlwind of divine light in the choking dark, but the tide of animated bone was endless. They clawed at his legs, snapped at his arms, a relentless, screeching wall of death. He was not being wounded, but he was being slowed, his path blocked by the very remains he was sworn to protect. Ahead, the core of the demon, that concentrated stream of black mist, was receding, slipping around a corner and down a narrower, older passage. It was escaping into the deepest, most ancient crypts, where the silence was absolute and the shadows had not been disturbed for a millennium. A cold, tactical fury seized Casil. This could not continue. Could not win a war of attrition against the entire Vatican necropolis. He needed to break the puppet master's will. He planted his feet, ignoring the skeletal fingers scrabbling at his coat. He raised Lux Dei high, not to strike at the bones, but to channel. He focused not on the physical, but on the spiritual tether that bound the defiled remains to the fleeing demonic essence. He poured his will into the blade, and its light changed. It was no longer a weapon, but a lens, a searchlight into the realm of true names and binding oaths. The true name of a demon is not a word to be spoken. It is a sequence of resonant sins, a frequency of absolute evil. To know it is to have power over it. To force it into the light is to make it vulnerable. The golden light from his sword became a piercing beam, spearing down the corridor after the vanishing mist. It illuminated the black vapor, and for a fraction of a second, the core of the demon was pinned in the light, its fundamental, hateful signature exposed. And in that moment, Casil saw it. He didn't hear it, he perceived it. A complex, horrifying symbol etched in fire against his mind. A name that was a curse in itself. The bone puppets surrounding him froze mid-attack. Their movement arrested as the demon's will was momentarily turned inward, recoiling from the violation of its true self being seen. It was all the opening he needed. Casil moved. He did not swing his sword at the bones. Instead, he dropped to one knee and slammed his bare, bloodied palm onto the cold stone floor. His own blood, the mingled silver of the divine and red of the human, welled from his wounds and smeared against the stone. With his finger burning with inner light, he began to write. He traced the true name he had perceived, not in ink or in air, but in his own blood upon the hallowed ground of the necropolis. Each stroke sizzled and smoked. The blood did not pool, etched itself into the rock, glowing with a fierce white-hot intensity. The air hummed with a terrifying power, the pressure of a binding so ancient it predated the stones around them. The name completed, the entire labyrinth shuddered. The bone puppets collapsed into inert piles, the malicious energy animating them snuffed out instantly. From deep within the passage ahead came a deafening psychic scream of pure agony and absolute rage, the sound of a demon being caught in a snare of its own identity. The black mist reversed its course. It was no longer fleeing. It was being dragged back, pulled inexorably toward the bloody burning name on the floor, toward the one who had named it. The hunt was over. The capture had begun. The final confrontation would happen here, in the dark. On a floor inscribed with the damnation written in the blood of its hunter, the demon's essence, caught in the inexorable pull of its true name, did not come quietly. It was a torrent of screaming darkness, a cyclone of hatred forced back down the stone corridor toward Casil. It did not try to reform its broken body. That vessel was ashes. Instead, it coalesced into a new, more primal shape, a serpent of pure shadow and malice, thick as a man's torso and endless in length. Its scales a shifting tapestry of damned faces and silent screams. It shot toward him not to attack, but to escape the pull of the bloody sigil on the floor. It bypassed him entirely, ignoring the hunter for the trap. With a force that cracked the ancient stones, it erupted upward, bursting through the ceiling of the necropolis in a shower of dirt and bone. Casil was right behind it, bursting up through the same hole into a space of breathtaking beauty and profound silence. The cold, dank air of the catacombs was instantly replaced by the hushed, reverent atmosphere of the Sistine Chapel. The demon serpent, a thing of absolute void, coiled high above the magnificent frescoed floor. Its form seemed to drink the light, casting no reflection on the polished marble below. It twisted in the air, its head a featureless spike of condensed hatred swiveling to take in the room. Its gaze fell upon Michelangelo's masterpiece on the ceiling, the creation of Adam, the image of the life-giving touch between God and man, a silent shiver of ultimate. Contempt ran through the serpent's form. This was the lie it hated most. The divine favor bestowed upon the fragile, corruptible clay of humanity. It could not escape its name, but in its final moments of freedom, it would commit one last, unforgettable act of desecration. It arrowed upward, not toward the depiction of God, but toward the figure of Adam. It sought not to destroy the art, but to corrupt the story. It plunged into the fresco. There was no sound of impact. The paint did not peel. The plaster did not crack. Instead, the image itself began to change. The vibrant, lifelike colors around Adam's extended arm dulled, leaching away into a sickly gray. The healthy flesh tone of the first man's body darkened, taking on the bruised, necrotic hue of the demon's own form. The serene expression on Adam's face twisted into one of agony and despair. The demon was pouring its essence into the art, weaving its own damnation into the fabric of the sacred narrative. It was rewriting Genesis, turning the moment of creation into a portrait of inherent flaw and divine abandonment. Casil stood below, a lone figure on the vast floor. He could feel the spiritual pollution spreading like a stain, a psychic wound being inflicted upon the world's soul. To strike now would be to shatter one of humanity's greatest treasures. But to wait was to let the corruption become permanent. He raised Lux Dei, but not to swing it. He focused his will, his own mixed blood singing in his veins. The sword's light softened, becoming a focused beam of pure sanctification. He aimed it not at the demon, but at the painting itself. At the point where the serpent's darkness was seeping into Adam's form, the golden light touched the fresco. There was a sizzling sound, like water on a hot griddle. The gray pallor receded from Adam's arm, the healthy color returning in a wave. The demon within the painting recoiled, its presence burned by the concentrated light of creation itself. Trapped between the pull of its true name below and the purifying light before it, the serpent was forced out. It erupted from the ceiling, not as a stream of mist, but in a shower of black tarry droplets that rained down upon the chapel floor. Each one sizzling and burning the marble where it fell. Coiling on the floor, its form now flickering and unstable, the demon was finally utterly cornered. It had nowhere left to run, no more sanctuaries to defile. It was in the most famous room in the world, and its only company was its executioner. The final exorcism would happen here, under the watchful eyes of God, man, and the twisted, fading echo of itself in the art above. The demon serpent coiled upon the magnificent floor of the Sistine Chapel, a stain of absolute negation against the artistry of faith. Its form flickered, its substance unraveling, caught between the binding pull of its true name etched in blood deep below, and the purifying light of Lux Dei shining upon it. It had no more sanctuaries to defile, no more bodies to steal, was reduced to its core, a nexus of pure, undiluted hatred. It did not lash out. Instead, it began to condense, pulling its shadowy substance inward, growing denser and darker until it was no longer a serpent, but an obsidian black sphere hovering just above the floor. The air around it warped, the beautiful frescoes on the walls seeming to bend and stretch toward it, as if the chapel itself were being sucked into a tiny, hungry void. Then it spoke. Not with a voice, but by hammering the words directly into Cassiel's mind. It was the sound of a universe with no love, no hope, no light. See what you guard, see what you serve. The sphere did not attack Cassiel. It showed him, torn of images, sensations, and memories, not its own, but his flooded into him. It rifled through the vault of his soul, pulling out every moment of pain, every doubt, every failure. He saw the faces of those he had not been fast enough to save, their dying eyes accusing him. He felt the cold isolation of his own existence, neither fully human nor fully divine, a weapon without a home. He felt the crushing weight of centuries of violence, the endless tide of darkness he was forever destined to fight. The demon showed him the cardinal's face, twisted not by fear, but by a sly, knowing smile. "You are just another tool," the memory seemed to whisper. "A more efficient killer, but a killer nonetheless. You sanctify their violence with your blood." It pressed upon him the sheer, exhausting futility of it all. For every demon he banished, a dozen more would fester in the hearts of men like the cardinal. He was not stemming the tide, was bailing out an ocean with a thimble. The weight was immense. It was the weight of a broken halo, the burden of a divine mandate that felt increasingly like a curse. His knees buckled. Lux Dei's light wavered, its glow dimming as the demon's psychological assault found every crack in his resolve, every secret fear he harbored about his own purpose. The sphere of darkness drifted closer, drinking his despair, growing stronger from his moment of weakness. It was not trying to destroy his body, it was trying to annihilate his will, to make him lay down his sword and accept the pointlessness of his eternal war. To break him was a victory far greater than merely killing him. Cassiel gasped, his head pounding. The glorious art of the chapel, now a mocking prison of expectations he could never meet. The angelic wrath within him was silent, coldly logical, showing him the truth in the demon's words. The human fear screamed that it was all true, that he was alone, damned, and useless. He was on the verge of surrendering to the void. The sword felt like a lead weight in his hand. But then, another image surfaced, fighting its way through the torrent of despair. Not a memory of failure, but a sensation. The faint, silvery warmth of the young priest's soul in its final, defiant act. A light that had chosen to fight even in death. Faith that had remained unbroken. This was a small thing. A dying ember, but in the absolute darkness the demon offered, it was a sun. The weight was still there. The doubt was still there. They would likely always be there. But they were his to carry. They were the cost of the choice to fight, not the reason to surrender. With a shuddering, ragged breath, Cassiel's fingers tightened around the hilt of his sword. The light of Lux Dei did not flare back into brilliance. It came hard, sharp, focused, like a diamond formed under immense pressure. He looked at the sphere of darkness, and for the first time he did not see an embodiment of evil to be destroyed. He saw a liar, a parasite that could only grow in the shadows of doubt, and he was done providing it shade. The final exorcism could begin. The obsidian sphere of the demon hung in the air, a void that drank the light and hope from the world. Cassiel rose to his feet. The weight of his broken halo was not gone. He simply chose to bear it. The doubts were not silenced. He simply stopped listening. His will, tempered in the furnace of his own despair, was now an unbreakable blade. He did not charge, he did not roar. Each step was deliberate, a measured beat against the silent, hallowed floor. Lux Dei was no longer a blazing sun, but a needle of concentrated purpose, its light a cold, white star at the tip of the blade. The demon sensed the shift. The psychic assault ceased. Boyd shuddered, recognizing not rage or fear, but something far more terrifying, absolute, unwavering resolution. It had nothing left to threaten him with. Casil stopped before the sphere. He raised his sword, not to strike, but to point. The tip of the blade hovered an inch from the dark surface. He began to speak. His voice was low, not a shout, but a resonant chant that vibrated through the very stones of the chapel. He did not speak in Latin or any human tongue. The words were of the oldest language, the language of creation and banishment. A series of resonant frequencies that were anathema to the thing before him. Each syllable was a hammer blow against the demon's form. The sphere flinched, its perfect darkness rippling. Casil continued, his voice gaining strength, the words flowing from him as if channeled from a source beyond himself. He was not just speaking, he was unraveling. The air grew thick. The beautiful frescoes on the walls began to glow with a soft golden light, as if the saints and angels themselves were lending their voices to the litany. The chapel was no longer a setting, it was an instrument of expulsion. The sphere convulsed. Jagged cracks of painful white light split its surface. Sound began to emanate from within, a high-pitched, tearing shriek that was the sound of a universe of hatred being unmade. The void was being filled with light, and it was agony. Casil did not falter. He pressed the tip of his sword forward until it touched the cracking shell. The contact was catastrophic. The sphere did not explode. It unfolded. The compressed darkness within burst outwards, not as matter, but as a final, horrific vision. For a fleeting second, the form of the demon was visible in its true, non-corporeal aspect, a vast, multi-limbed thing of screaming mouths and burning eyes, a fractal pattern of infinite suffering. It was a glimpse into the absolute zero of the abyss. Then the light from Casil's sword, amplified by the sacred space and the binding words, consumed it. The vision imploded, the screams cutting off into a vacuum of silence. The darkness was not banished. It was erased, unwritten from existence, in a silent flash of purifying energy. A shockwave of pure force, silent and invisible, radiated outwards. It did not shatter glass or crack stone. It washed through the Vatican, a tide of spiritual nullification. In the hidden library, the whispers and the forbidden texts fell silent. In the defiled sacristy, the bloody sigils on the walls faded to rusty brown stains. In the necropolis, the taint on the bones dissipated. The obsidian sphere was gone. Where it had hovered, nothing remained but a scorched black circle on the pristine marble floor. The air, once heavy with malice, was now clean, hollow, and still. Casil stood over the mark, his sword arm lowered. The golden light in his eyes was dim. The chant was finished. The demon was gone. The final exorcism was complete. Not with a clash of steel, but with a word of power. The violence was not physical, but ontological. The thing that had defiled the Vatican had been utterly and irrevocably unmade. All that was left was the cost and the silence. Silence. It was the first true silence since the nightmare had begun. The oppressive weight of the demon's presence was gone, leaving a void in the air of the Sistine Chapel that felt both sacred and sterile. The only evidence of the cataclysm was the scorched black circle on the floor where the demon escort had been unmade. Casil stood over the mark, his body a testament to the battle. His coat was in tatters, slashed by talons and burned by acid blood. Beneath, his skin was a mosaic of cuts and blossoming bruises, the silver gold of his divine blood mingling with the darker red of his human frailty. He swayed on his feet, the immense spiritual and physical exertion crashing down upon him all at once. Luxday felt impossibly heavy in his hand, its light now completely dimmed, just cold, blessed steel. He did not sheathe it, not yet. The journey back was a slow, painful pilgrimage through the aftermath. He retraced his steps through the silent nave, past the splintered pews and the bloodstains that would never fully come out of the marble. He descended back into the necropolis, into the labyrinth of bones. The piles of skeletal remains were inert now, just bones again, resting in a peace they had been denied. He did not look at them long, found the cardinal in his hidden study, exactly as he had left him. The man was still on his knees, but his silent sobs had ceased. He was simply staring at the bloody circle, the dead dove, his hands resting limply in his lap. The stink of his guilt had not lessened with the demon's destruction. If anything, it was sharper, more defined. now that it was no longer overshadowed by a greater evil. Casil stopped in the doorway. The cardinal flinched but did not look up. "Is it?" the cardinal began, his voice a dry rasp. "Gone," Casil said, the single word final and heavy. The cardinal nodded slowly, a shudder running through his frame. There were no words of thanks, no excuses. There was only the vast, empty space of consequence. Cassiel's work was not done. A demon was banished, but the sin that invited it remained. He was the Pontificalis Venator. His duty was to protect the church, and sometimes that meant cutting out its cancer. He moved forward. The cardinal finally looked up, his eyes wide with a terrified understanding. There was no fight in him, only a resigned horror. Casil did not use his sword. This was not an execution for a demon. This required a different tool. He placed his bare hand, still smeared with his own blood and the ashes of the damned, upon the cardinal's forehead. The man gasped, his body seizing up. Casil closed his eyes, and his will, the same will that had unmade a creature of hell, turned inward. He did not kill the cardinal. He performed a different kind of excision. He sought the memory, the knowledge, the arrogant curiosity that had led to the ritual. He found it a rotten knot in the man's soul land. He burned it away. The cardinal cried out a short, sharp sound of agony, and then slumped forward, unconscious. He would live. But he would wake with no memory of forbidden texts, of dark rituals, of the thing he had summoned. He would only have a gap in his memory, a profound sense of shame he could not place, and the certain, unshakable knowledge that he was damned. Casil turned and left him there, climbed out of the undercroft, back into the main halls. The first gray light of dawn was beginning to filter through the high windows, illuminating the devastation. Figures were starting to appear at the far ends of corridors, stunned guards. Pale-faced clerics, drawn by the unnatural silence that had followed the storm. They saw him, a bloodied, terrifying figure walking through the heart of their world with a naked sword. And they froze, crossing themselves, their eyes wide with a fear that was now meant for him. He ignored them. He walked out into the crisp dawn air of the piazza. The rain had stopped. He stood there, alone in the vast empty space, the facade of St. Peter's Basilica behind him. The ashes of the damned were on his hands. The tears of the divine his own, for the priest, for the guards, for the faith that had been broken, were dry on his face. He had saved the Vatican. He had purified it with blood and fire. And as the sun broke over the horizon, casting long shadows, he knew he had never felt further from its grace. He was the necessary blade, and blades are kept in darkness. The victory was absolute, and it tasted only of ashes. The dawn sun gilded the domes and crosses of Vatican City, a lie of peace painted over a night of abomination. Casil stood in the empty piazza, a stark, bloodied silhouette against the immaculate cobblestones. The silence was no longer a held breath, but a void. The demon was ash, the summoner was mind-wiped. The damage was contained. By every metric of his duty, it was over. He finally sheathed Lux Dei. The soft click of the blade settling into its scabbard was the loudest sound in the world. The weight of it on his back was a familiar anchor, but it felt different now. It felt heavier, not with the weight of the sword, but with the weight of the silence that would follow. He turned his back on St. Peter's Basilica. No one approached him. The few figures at the edges of the square guards, early morning clerics, kept their distance, their faces pale masks of awe and terror. They saw a savior who walked in a cloud of violence, a necessary monster they were grateful for and feared. He was the wound that had been inflicted to cut out the disease, and the scar he left would be a cold and ugly thing. He walked away, not through the grand gates, but into the shadowed alleys that bordered the holy state, melting into the waking city of Rome. The sounds of morning traffic, of shutters rolling up, of ordinary life beginning anew, were a dissonant chorus to the echoes of screams and holy chants that still rang in his ears. His body ached, a deep, bone-weary pain that was more than physical. The blood on his clothes had dried stiff and black. He found a secluded corner in a forgotten piazza, away from the crowds, and slumped against a sun-warmed stone wall, finally allowing the exhaustion to claim him. but there was no peace and rest. When he closed his eyes, he did not see the demon's true form. He saw the young priest's face in the confessional, the life draining from his eyes. He saw the cardinal's empty, guilty stare. He felt the cold, logical satisfaction of his angelic half, warring with the grieving horror of his human half. He had done what was necessary. He had been perfect in his purpose. And it had left a stain on his soul that no prayer could wash clean. This was the unquiet faith, not a lack of belief, but a belief that had stared into the abyss and seen the terrible cost of keeping it at bay. It was the knowledge that light casts long shadows, and that he would forever walk in them. The Vatican would clean the blood, repair the stone, and tell a sanitized story. The faithful would never know the price that had been paid in the dark to keep their dawn bright. He was the keeper of that truth, the living, breathing reminder that their faith was not a passive shield, but a thing defended with violence and sacrifice. He was the unspoken prayer for protection, the one that acknowledged the darkness in order to reject it. A small, tentative sound broke his reverie. A child, no more than 5, had wandered away from her mother at a cafe across the square. She stood a few feet away, staring at him with wide, curious eyes, not seeing the blood or the terror, but perhaps sensing the otherness, the sadness. She held out a single flower, a white daisy, its petals bright in the morning sun. Cassio looked at her, his glowing eyes dim with exhaustion. He did not move to take it. He simply gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. The child smiled, placed the flower on the ground near his boot, and scampered back to her mother. He looked down at the simple, perfect thing. A symbol of innocence, of a world that could still offer beauty without condition. It was a world he had just ensured could continue to exist. He pushed himself to his feet, his body protesting every movement. He left the flower where it lay. It did not belong with him. He walked away, down the narrow street, the sun at his back. The faith was unquiet. The peace was hard-won. The darkness was eternal. So was he. The sword on his back was a promise, not of peace, but of vigilance. The hunt was never over. It had only just begun.